Fresh from the shower, Gideon Ashwood stood at the bathroom door, a single towel wrapped around his hips. His chest muscles were firm, his abs chiseled, and droplets of water, still clinging to his skin, traced a path along his V-line before disappearing into the towel. It was an onslaught of raw masculinity, a visceral punch that left me frozen in place. My new roommate was, quite frankly, a little too tempting for my own good. Clara Hawthorne stirred awake to the faint commotion drifting in from the living room. Groggy, she rubbed her eyes and fumbled for her phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up, revealing an unread text from her former teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Price. She tapped it open without thinking. "My son's back early. He's probably already there." Clara's mind, still foggy from sleep, hadn't quite caught up. The living room noises persisted, low, deliberate footsteps mingled with the creak of a door. Then it hit her like a thunderclap. With a startled yelp, she scrambled out of bed, yanking on clothes in a frantic rush. She'd been living here for months, long enough to almost forget this wasn't her house, it belonged to someone else. Cracking the door open, Clara didn't step out right away. Instead, she peeked cautiously into the spacious living room. Sunlight spilled through the windows, pooling on the hardwood floor. A man stood by the coffee table, his figure framed against the light streaming in from behind. She couldn't make out his face, only his silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, with long limbs and a narrow waist. This had to be Mrs. Price's son, Gideon Ashwood. 6 months ago, Clara had moved to a city for an internship. A small-town girl with no local roots, finding a place to live had been a nightmare. Rents were astronomical, or the locations were too remote. In the end, it was Mrs. Price, her kind-hearted junior high teacher, who came to her rescue. Mrs. Price's son, Gideon, worked in a city and owned a place in the bustling downtown area. For the past half-year, he'd been away on a construction project in another province, leaving the apartment vacant. Mrs. Price had offered it to Clara, suggesting she stay until Gideon returned. If he didn't mind, she could even keep living there afterward. With a city's sky-high costs and Clara's meager entry-level salary, sharing a place with a stranger was hardly a deal-breaker. Last night, she'd spoken with Mrs. Price over the phone. Gideon wasn't due back until late afternoon, around 5 or 6. Clara had planned to whip up an impressive dinner to win over her new landlord. But plans, it seemed, were no match for reality. Gideon's early return had derailed her scheme before it even started. A faint whiff of tobacco tickled her nose. Clara pressed her lips together and tiptoed out into the living room. The man was bent over, grinding a cigarette butt into an ashtray. As he leaned forward, his shirt rode up slightly, exposing a sliver of skin at his waist, a deep, bronzed tone that gleamed subtly in the sunlight. Clara, an illustrator with a side gig drawing steamy BL comics, had a peculiar sensitivity to the human form. That narrow waist alone was enough to convince her, this guy's body was perfection. "Mr. Ashwood," she ventured, stepping closer. He turned, revealing a face that was ordinary in its features yet strikingly handsome as a whole. His short, no-nonsense haircut accentuated the sharp angles of his jaw, exuding a rugged charm far removed from the polished pretty boys of today. "Clara?" Gideon's voice rasped, rough-edged and magnetic, like sandpaper wrapped in velvet. She nodded, guessing Mrs. Price had filled him in. Flashing a grin, she said, "Looks like I'll be crashing here for a while." "Oh, and how much rent do you think I should pay?" For the past 6 months, Mrs. Price had refused to take a dime from her, which left Clara feeling guilty. Now that the apartment's owner was back, it was time to settle up. Gideon raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms as he sized her up. She stood there, petite and a full head shorter than him, her delicate features lit with a smile and those familiar dimples dotting her cheeks. He licked his teeth, a fleeting memory surfacing, a sticky piece of toffee from years ago, cloying yet too sweet to spit out. A minute ticked by without an answer. Clara's smile faltered, and she tried again, tentative. "Mr. Ash, ah." she yelped as he suddenly leaned in close, cutting her off. His gaze dropped, a low chuckle rumbling from his throat. "You're not scared, living alone with a guy?" They were inches apart now, his warm breath brushing her face, laced with tobacco and an overwhelming masculine scent. Clara stiffened, her brain short-circuiting. It took a moment for his words to sink in, and then her imagination ran wild. Phrases like assault, then murder, then assault flashed through her in in a lurid parade. She stumbled back, clutching her chest as she blurted, "I'll have you know, I'm tight with your mom." "So?" Gideon arched a brow. Clara glared, words tumbling out before she could stop them. "So if you try anything shady, I'll tell her." The second it left her mouth, she cringed. It sounded like a kid tattling to a teacher after getting picked on by a bully. Gideon barked a laugh. "You haven't changed a bit." "Changed?" Clara blinked, thrown off. What did that mean? Had they met before? Her confusion must have shown, because Gideon's grin faded, his expression darkening slightly. He didn't tease further, just shrugged and said, "I hear you're decent in the kitchen. Handle dinner from now on, and we'll call it even for rent." Clara stared for a beat, then nodded eagerly. Mrs. Price must have mentioned her cooking skills. Deal sealed. That night, it dawned on her, sharing a space with a guy might be trickier than she'd thought. She froze mid-step. Gideon stood at the bathroom door, fresh from a shower, clad only in a towel slung low around his hips. His chest was sculpted, his abs taut, and water droplets slid enticingly down his frame, vanishing into the fabric. It was a testosterone-fueled assault on her senses, and Clara gaped, her eyes glued to him. In her mind, she was already sketching the flawless lines of his body. Gideon grabbed a towel, lazily scrubbing his damp hair as he sauntered toward her, his smirk playful. Staring again? A white towel sailed through the air, landing squarely on her head. Snapping out of it, Clara clawed it off, only to catch a glimpse of his broad, toned back as he walked away. "I wasn't staring," she huffed, stomping off to shower, cheeks puffed in indignation. After her bath, Clara got to work. As a freelance illustrator, she sometimes drew spicy BL comics for extra cash, and Gideon's physique was prime inspiration. "Humph," she thought smugly, "your body's about to make me some money." The next morning, still half asleep, Clara shuffled out for water. She didn't get far before slamming into what felt like a wall. Reeling back from the impact, she staggered, nearly kissing the floor, until a strong hand caught her. Her sleepy brain hadn't registered much. She bumped her head against the wall again, mumbling, "Why's it bouncy?" A deep chuckle sounded above her. Clara blinked up, bleary-eyed, and found Gideon's handsome face staring back. She was in his arms. Realization hit like a bucket of ice water. She pushed against his chest, slick with sweat, the faint musk filling her senses. Morning run," she stammered, stepping back with her water glass. "Great habit." Gideon smirked, brushing past her toward the bathroom. Clara turned, just in time to see him yank off his sweat-soaked tank top, revealing that bronzed, sweat-glistened back. Her face burned as she chanted. Silently, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." She was about to look away when he glanced over his shoulder, lips curling wickedly. "Caught you again, huh?" "Again?" Clara scoffed, forcing a straight face. "I'm a girl, you know, could you maybe not strip in front of me?" "My house," he shot back, for simple words that left her speechless. She opened her mouth to argue, then deflated. Fine, shirtless wasn't a big deal, better than pantsless, at least. As if reading her mind, Gideon grinned mischievously, hands drifting to his waistband. "What are you doing?" she yelped, startled. "Taking off my pants," he said, deadpan. Clara's eyes widened. "You?" "Kidding," he teased, winking. "Unless you want a show?" "No way," she sputtered, bolting back to her room without her water, slamming the door shut. Gideon's laughter rang out, rich and unrestrained. Still so easy to rile up, he thought, and just as cute. Inside her room, Clara hugged a pillow, rolling across the bed in frustration. The walls were thin, his amusement echoed clearly. She knew he was toying with her, but she couldn't fight back, not yet. Why did Mrs. Price's son have to be this kind of guy? Barely a day in, and he was already this comfortable joking around. She had a sinking feeling life here was about to get a lot more chaotic. Gideon's job kept him busy, often gone from dawn till dusk, a fact Clara secretly welcomed. He was rough around the edges, quick with a quip, and loved getting a rise out of her. She couldn't stoop to his level, it was all in good fun, and besides, she was a guest in his home. So she let his teasing slide, in one ear and out the other. That evening, dinner sat cooling on the table with no sign of Gideon. Frowning, Clara dialed his number. The line rang, then his voice crackled through, huskier than usual. "Hey." A tingle shot up her spine. She switched to speakerphone, setting it down. "You're not eating?" "Nah, staying out," he replied, his tone lazy, undercut by muffled chatter in the background. Clara hummed an acknowledgement, reaching to hang up. "Whoa." A chick's voice, a loud guy cut in. "Gideon, when'd you snag a girlfriend? Hiding her away like some secret treasure, didn't even tell us." Clara froze as Gideon laughed, scolding the guy, but not denying it. Her pulse quickened for no reason she could name, and she hastily ended the call. It was nearly 8 by the time she finished eating. Assuming Gideon was out for the night, she skipped a shower and sprawled on the couch, scrolling Twitter. 2 hours slipped by. "Yo, Gideon, slow down," a voice called from the door. Clara glanced over. A lanky guy was helping Gideon inside. Spotting her, his eyes lit up. "Hey, sis-in-law, lend a hand, Gideon's plastered." "Sis-in-law?" Clara looked around, bewildered. No one else here but her. "Me?" she asked, pointing at herself. "Yeah." The guy nodded, stumbling forward and nearly dropping Gideon. Clara rushed over, catching him just as the lanky guy let go with a grin. "All yours, sis-in-law." "Hey." Clara grunted as Gideon slumped against her, the sharp scent of liquor enveloping her. She gripped his solid arms, struggling to stay upright. "Catch you later, sis-in-law." The guy waved, already halfway out. "Wait," she called, desperate. "Stop calling me that, I'm just his tenant." "Tenant?" The guy paused, squinting. Gideon, rich as he was, sharing a place? With a girl? And he hadn't corrected the sis-in-law bit earlier. Then it clicked, her face looked familiar. Clara gasped as Gideon nuzzled into her neck, his warm, boozy breath sending shivers down her spine. Gritting her teeth, she hooked an arm around his waist and dragged him toward the couch. After a Herculean effort, they reached it. She shoved him down, only to trip and fall with him. Ow! Her nose smashed into his chest, tears pricking her eyes. Rubbing it gingerly, she pushed herself up. Ah! Another yelp, his leg kicked out, knocking her off balance. She crashed back down, lips landing squarely on his jaw. Clara froze, the warm skin beneath her lips short-circuiting her brain. The lanky guy gawked. Holy hell, that escalated fast. It took her a solid minute to scramble up, hand over her mouth. She glanced at Gideon, and found him awake, cheeks flushed from drink but eyes clear, a smirk tugging at his lips. Her mind blanked. Caught in the act? "Wait, I know you," the lanky guy exclaimed, clapping his hands. "You're that toffee girl from way back." Toffee girl? Clara's head spun with question marks. Did he know her? Back in junior high, she'd been obsessed with toffee candies, earned her the nickname. Full circle after all these years, huh? "You two ended up together," the guy said, grinning fondly. Clara, still lost. "Alright, I'll leave you lovebirds to it," he teased, winking as he headed out. "Take it easy on him, sis-in-law, he's drunk." The door clicked shut, leaving Clara clutching a pillow, utterly baffled, and Gideon still grinning like he'd won something. It wasn't until the lanky guy shut the door that Clara snapped out of her daze. She glanced down and saw Gideon propped up on the couch, his head resting on folded arms, watching her with an amused, almost predatory glint in his eyes. Drunk? Hardly. He looked wide awake. The memory of their earlier mishap flooded back, and embarrassment washed over her. Time for a tactical retreat, she decided, better to hide in her room than face this. But as she turned to flee, Gideon sat up, leaning lazily against the couch. "Hold up," he called, his voice a low drawl. Clara paused, glancing back. "What's up?" she asked, keeping her tone soft. "Hungry." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze lingering on her with playful interest. Clara hesitated, then ventured, "I could make some noodles. Want some?" Gideon chuckled, a suggestive edge to his tone. "Your noodles? For me?" Oblivious to the trap she'd stumbled into, Clara nodded earnestly. "Yeah." "Seriously?" "Seriously." She bobbed her head, though a nagging feeling crept in. This conversation was veering into weird territory. Then she caught the sly curve of his smile and realized she'd been had. The innuendo hit her like a freight train, and her face stiffened. "Don't joke like that," she muttered, lips barely moving. "Mad?" Gideon stood, stretching casually. "You sneak attacked me earlier, and I didn't complain." Clara choked on her reply, the awkward memory resurfacing. "That was an accident," she protested weakly. "Uh-huh. Sure it was." He shrugged, lying back down with a grin that said he knew more than he let on. Mortified, Clara bolted. 2 steps in, he called again. "Kidding aside, make me those noodles, will you?" Torn for a moment, she relented and shuffled to the kitchen. 15 minutes later, Gideon demolished a steaming bowl of tomato egg noodles. He even washed the dishes himself, a rare act of domesticity. As the sound of running water drifted from the kitchen, Clara's mind snagged on something. "That guy earlier, he's your friend?" she asked. "Yeah." Gideon ambled out, sprawling onto the couch with a boldness that filled the room. His closeness carried an invasive energy she wasn't used to, and she scooted aside instinctively. "He seemed to know me," she said. "Even knew my junior high nickname." "Toffee girl?" Clara's eyes widened, suspicion dawning. "You know it too?" "Course I do." His confirmation sparked a wild guess. Were they old schoolmates? Gideon read her expression like an open book, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Before she could process it, he stretched an arm across the back of the couch, leaning in close. His voice dropped to a wicked murmur as he studied her startled face. "You really forgot me completely, huh?" Forgot him? Did they actually know each other? She racked her brain but came up blank. Maybe jogged my memory," she stammered, shrinking back as his handsome face loomed nearer. He hooked an arm around her shoulder, his heat seeping through her clothes. Clara's breath hitched, and she pushed against him. He caught her hand, his grip scorching from the lingering effects of alcohol. Her skin tingled under his touch. She wasn't used to this kind of closeness with any guy her age. Since moving in with Gideon, his teasing had been relentless, and in just 2 weeks, he'd managed to cop feels of her waist and hands like it was nothing. Anger flared, but it was drowned by a tidal wave of flustered shame. His casual flirting was getting under her skin, and damn it, it was working. A hot guy teasing a single girl? Of course she'd catch feelings. Biting her lip, she averted her eyes. "Let go. We can talk without all this touching." Gideon arched a brow. "Not letting go." Not only that, he rubbed his thumb lightly across her hand, the rough callus against her smooth skin, sparking an odd sensation. Her cheeks flamed as she accused, "You're being a creep." "Yep," he admitted with a shameless hum, grinning. "Blame it on you for getting me." Clara sighed, exasperated. She genuinely couldn't remember, so she stopped resisting, letting him hold her hand in a silent truce. Seeing her surrender, Gideon eased off. He released her with a smirk, plenty of time to play this game later. Near midnight, Clara sprawled on her bed, texting her childhood bestie, Beatrice Quinn, on WeChat. They'd been inseparable growing up, only parting ways for college. Back in junior high, Clara had been oblivious to school gossip, while Beatrice was the resident know-it-all. If anyone could crack this, it was her. Gideon Ashwood, ring any bells? Clara typed. Beatrice replied instantly, oh yeah. Our junior high's resident bad boy. Didn't you snitch on him to Mrs. Price once? The message jolted Clara's memory. Bad boy? Gideon? A fuzzy image surfaced, a punk with yellow hair, half his face hidden behind a shaggy fringe. No way, that couldn't be him. She'd known of the school's bad boy, but his name had never registered. A nerdy otaku lost in her own world, she'd barely paid attention. But there was that one incident. It was the end of 8th grade. On her way back to class, a gang of 9th grade delinquents cornered her, saying the bad boy had a crush on her. Terrified, Clara dropped her toffee candy and bolted, not daring to pick it up. She vaguely recalled a yellow-haired figure snatching it off the ground, staring at her with unnerving interest. Too scared to cope, she'd run to Mrs. Price and tattled about the bad boy. Beatrice hadn't mentioned his name, and Clara never asked, just called him the bad boy in her report. Word got around that Mrs. Price chewed him out, and after middle school exams, he vanished from her life. The pieces clicked into place. No wonder Gideon acted so oddly around her. Enemies turned roommates? But what was his deal, revenge, or something else? Clara wrestled with the confusion, unsure what his teasing meant. The next day, facing Gideon felt different, awkward, tinged with guilt. The man on the couch, with his sharp buzz cut and rugged good looks, bore no resemblance to that gaudy punk from her past. I think I remember you, she said, opting for honesty. Gideon nodded, unfazed, quirking a brow as if waiting for more. Clara fumbled, no wonder I didn't recognize you. That hair hiding your face, pretty out there, huh? His usual smirk froze, then faded. For once, he had no comeback. After a beat, he muttered, that's all you've got to say? What else was there? An apology? But she'd only snitched because she was freaked out. Before she could decide, Gideon took the reins. Got a boyfriend? His stare was intense, earnest, searing. The air in the sprawling living room thickened, their breaths intertwining. Clara's lips parted, her heart thudding, she could guess where this was going. Nervous and unprepared, she nodded on impulse. The second she did, she froze. Why'd I lie? Gideon's gaze darkened, his expression unreadable. Disappointment, maybe? Before she could backtrack, a knock shattered the silence. Clara jumped up to answer it. A perky young girl stood outside, all smiles and curiosity in her eyes. Spotting Gideon, she chirped, hey, big bro Gideon. Let's go, my brother's waiting downstairs. Gideon grunted, grabbed his shoes, and left without a word, the girl chattering at his side. As their footsteps faded, Clara's thoughts churned. Was it his question or that cozy scene that left her so unsettled? He returned before dinner. Clara poked at her rice, feigning nonchalance. That girl this morning. Girlfriend, Gideon said with a light laugh, tone casual. Oh. Her chopstick stilled, her mood dimming. Us living together, she won't get the wrong idea, right? Why would she? You've got a boyfriend. Does he mind? Clara choked, mumbling incoherently. Boyfriend? What boyfriend? She couldn't dig herself out of that lie now. After that, things shifted. Gideon cooled off, no more banter, just polite distance. Clara wasn't used to this reserved version of him, and it threw her off balance, leaving her restless and inexplicably down. Her feelings for him were growing weirder by the day, something was budding, quietly taking root. One evening after work, she witnessed a bombshell, the girlfriend from that morning, arm in arm with another guy, sharing an ice cream like a lovesick couple. Clara blinked, imagining a neon green hat perched on Gideon's head. Torn, she decided he deserved to know. When he got home, she hinted at it vaguely. "We're done," he said, calm as ever, no rage, no dramatics. Turns out, the girlfriend was a fib, he'd tossed it out that day, to rile Clara up. She was the lanky guy's sister, just popping by to scope out the sis-in-law. Clara didn't know that, though. In her mind, Gideon was freshly single, and for some reason, that sparked a flicker of joy. Days rolled into fall, and a class reunion hit. After hours of drinking, Clara stumbled home past 9, cheeks rosy with booze. She wasn't a good drunk, alcohol unleashed her wild side. Like now. "I want a draw," she slurred, clambering onto the couch where Gideon sat shirtless, phone in hand. She draped herself over his bare chest, like an octopus. Draw, even plastered, her artist instincts kicked in. She traced his sculpted abs, muttering, "Gonna make you an emperor bottom." Gideon steadied her swaying form, poking her flushed cheek and grabbing her wandering hand. "Playing drunk to cop a feel?" he teased, smirking. Clara sobered for a split second before sinking back into her haze. She wreaked havoc until her stomach rebelled, and, pure instinct, she puked, then blacked out. Morning came with a scream. Clara clutched her nightgown, horrified. She remembered getting drunk, vomiting, then, nothing. Who'd changed her into this? Gideon? A quick check, no telltale soreness. Phew, no drunken hookup. But the nightgown meant someone saw her naked. She gnawed her lip, mortified. Dressed, she stepped out. Gideon was back from his run, showering. A peek at the washing machine confirmed her dirty clothes from last night. She dumped in detergent and started it. When Gideon emerged, towel drying his hair, his bare back faced her, crisscrossed with red scratches. "Claw marks?" He caught her staring and grinned. "Your handiwork. Happy?" "Mine?" Clara forced a laugh. "Oops, got wasted." "Always an accident with you," he said, tossing the towel aside and flopping onto the couch. "Last night, you wouldn't let go, insisted on a heart-to-heart. Gotta say, your way of confessing is unique." "Confessing?" Clara's brain stalled. "What did I say?" "Do?" "You hugged me, pinned me down, hands all over." He paused, then added, "Said you liked me, and your way of showing it is drawing me into your smutty comics." "Clara, no way." "Thought you had a boyfriend," he mused, smirking. "Dumping him already?" "Dump who?" She sulked, muttering, "Both single here, let's drop the dating talk." Gideon's eyes gleamed with interest, stroking his chin thoughtfully. After that, they slipped back into their old rhythm, teasing, charged with a flirty edge. That unspoken tension hung between them, a thin veil neither dared pierce. It was maddening, this itch she couldn't scratch. One night, Clara vented in her BL comic fan group. "Living with a guy, things feel flirty. What do I do?" Her years as a semi-known artist had built a lively following. Replies flooded in. "Co-ed living always leads to something. +1. +2. She typed again, who should make the first move? Him. Her. A barrage of arguments followed. Clara scrolled, dazed, until one comment cut through, "Doesn't matter who moves first, does he like you back? If not, it's awkward as hell." "So, does he?" Clara froze. She liked Gideon, sure, but him? Then a familiar avatar chimed in, "Yes." Her heart skipped. It was Gideon's QQ profile, same as his WeChat. "He's in my fan group?" Panic set in. That drunken night, did I spill everything? Gideon seized the moment, knocking on her door. Clara pressed against it, refusing to open. What's up? She squeaked. Faking it, huh? His laugh vibrated through the wood. Spit it out, or I'm sleeping, she bluffed, holding firm. Silence, then footsteps fading. He gave up? Just as she sulked, a key turned in the lock. The door swung open, Gideon dangling the spare with a triumphant grin. Before she could react, he hooked her waist, pulling her close. Clara jolted, instinct screaming to retreat. What are you hiding from? He murmured, breath hot against her face, sending tingles down her spine. She pushed, but he caught her hands, pinning them. Let's settle this, he said, lifting her chin. His voice softened, eyes warm with intent. I'll go first, how's that? Blushing, Clara met his gaze and nodded. Epilogue. At New Year's, Clara tagged along with Gideon to meet his family. Seeing Mrs. Price again, now as her boyfriend's mom instead of her old teacher, left Clara sheepish, perched stiffly on the couch with a shy smile. Mrs. Price emerged from the kitchen with a fruit platter, fussing over Clara while shooting Gideon an approving look. Well done, son. Gideon smirked, saying nothing. He'd never forgotten her, not really. That teenage crush had lingered, her face etched in his memory. When he heard she needed a place, an idea sparked. Get close, win her over. No opportunity? Make one. The end.